On a stormy night, Emma and John, a couple on a road trip, found themselves stranded in the middle of nowhere after their car broke down. They had no cell service, and the relentless rain had created a dark, oppressive atmosphere. After waiting for hours and with no help in sight, they saw a flickering light in the distance. Desperate, they decided to walk towards it, hoping it was a house or a gas station. The light led them to an old, decaying house surrounded by trees, almost completely isolated from the rest of the world. The elderly woman who opened the door seemed to be expecting them. She invited them in without hesitation, saying she had seen them walking in the storm and had prepared a meal. The couple settled in, grateful for shelter from the storm, but as the night went on, they began to hear strange noises, creaks and moans from the house, the floorboards groaning as if someone or something was walking round. Emma's unease grew as she noticed that the old woman didn't seem bothered at all by the house's eerie atmosphere. There were no photos on the walls, no signs of recent life. The couple stayed in their room, hoping for morning. When the storm subsided, they woke up to find the house had changed. The air felt colder, the furniture was covered in a thick layer of dust, and the woman was nowhere to be found. The couple ventured outside to find that the house was abandoned, with no signs of recent habitation. They asked around in the nearby town and learned that the house was known to locals as the Lightning House, and it was said that anyone who entered would be haunted by the woman who had once lived there, who had been struck by lightning during a storm years ago. It was then they realized the woman they had encountered was a ghost, and the house was a place trapped in time, reliving the moments of her death. On another rainy night, Mike, a long-haul truck driver, found himself navigating through a dense fog that had settled on a narrow, desolate highway. The storm was relentless, and his headlights barely cut through the thick mist. As he drove, he noticed a figure in the distance, a lone man walking along the road, dressed in ragged clothes and appearing lost in the rain. Feeling sorry for him, Mike pulled over, offering the man a ride. The man climbed into the truck without a word, his damp clothes leaving a wet spot on the seat. His face was pale, and he had a distant, hollow look in his eyes. As they drove through the storm, the man spoke only in fragments, mentioning his need to get home and how he had been walking for days. Mike, distracted by the storm, didn't think much of it, but the man's words began to feel strange. His voice was hoarse, and his breath seemed to rattle in his chest. The storm worsened, and Mike noticed that the man was becoming even paler. He was no longer shivering from the cold, but his body seemed to grow more translucent, as though the storm was draining the life from him. The air grew thick with a sense of dread. At one point, Mike glanced over at the passenger seat, but the man was gone. The seat was empty, and Mike was left with only a cold, damp spot where the man had sat. He stopped the truck and looked around, but there was no sign of the stranger. It was as if the man had vanished into the storm. Later, Mike learned that the highway he was on had been the site of several accidents, many involving travelers who had been stranded in storms and had mysteriously disappeared. One of those travelers had been a man matching the description of the one Mike had picked up. Mike realized with horror that he had given a ride to a ghost, a man who had died on that very road during a storm years ago. Lisa, a young woman, was walking home from work late one stormy night. The rain pelted down in sheets, and the wind howled through the empty streets. But Lisa was used to these late-night walks. She pulled her jacket tighter around herself, eager to get home. However, as she walked down an alley, She began to hear the distinct sound of footsteps behind her. She quickened her pace, but the footsteps matched hers, getting closer and closer with every step. She felt a chill creep up her spine and turned to look, but no one was there. She continued walking, trying to dismiss the sound, but the footsteps persisted. They echoed with an unnatural precision, following her every move. Her heart raced as she walked faster, yet the footsteps were gaining on her. Fear crept over her, and she turned another corner, hoping to escape. But the footsteps continued, now louder, as though the person was right behind her. Lisa finally stopped, spinning around to confront her pursuer, only to find that the street was empty. There was no one there. Just as she was about to resume her walk, she looked down at the puddles on the street, and to her horror, she saw the reflection of footsteps perfectly clear, but no one was in sight. The sound of footsteps echoed in the rain, and Lisa realized the haunting truth. The footsteps weren't just following her in the physical world, they were also reflected in the water, and they weren't hers. She ran home, shaken, but the echoes of the footsteps followed her in her mind. The next day, Lisa learned that the street she had walked down had been the site of several unexplained disappearances over the years, and some locals claimed that the footsteps were the sound of those who had never left.